My name is Audrey Morgan. I'm 33 years old, and the day my mother tried to bankrupt me in front of a packed courtroom was the day I finally understood that some parents don't want their children to grow. They want them to stay small enough to control. The most shocking moment wasn't when her lawyer stood up and called me financially reckless. It wasn't when he laid out charts of my income like evidence from a crime scene. It wasn't even when my own mother avoided my eyes while strangers whispered my name. The moment that split my life in two was when the judge leaned forward, folded his hands, and said, "Mrs. Morgan, before I rule on anything, I need to ask you one question." That question would change everything. But before I tell you what it was, let me take you back to how I ended up sitting there, alone, humiliated, and staring at the woman who gave birth to me like she was a stranger. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you, stay with me. And if stories like this hit close to home, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because silence is how people like my mother keep winning. The courtroom smelled like old wood and cold air. My heels clicked too loudly as I walked to the defendant's table, every step echoing my nerves. I could feel eyes on me, some curious, some judgmental, some entertained. This wasn't just a legal hearing, this was a public stripping. Across the room sat my mother, Linda Morgan, perfectly composed in a cream blazer she'd probably ironed herself. Her hair was styled the way it always was for church or charity events, soft waves, neutral makeup, the face she wore when she wanted people to believe she was kind. She didn't look angry, she looked calm, prepared, like this was just another errand she'd checked off her list. I tried to catch her eye, just once. She didn't look back. Her lawyer stood and began speaking like he was reading a grocery list, calm, precise, merciless. He talked about my business loans, my mortgage, my credit lines. He said words like irresponsible, unstable, and financial dependency as if they were facts carved in stone. He implied that I'd manipulated my mother into helping me, that I'd drained her resources, that I was a risk to myself and to others. What he didn't say out loud, but let hang in the air, was worse, that I didn't deserve what I'd built. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone that I'd paid every loan on time, that I'd worked nights and weekends, that I'd built my consulting business from my kitchen table while my friends were posting vacation photos. The only thing I'd ever asked my mother for was emotional support, and even that came with strings. But courts don't run on feelings, they run on narratives, and my mother had paid a very good lawyer to write hers. As he spoke, my mind drifted back to a different room, a smaller one. My childhood bedroom with pale blue walls and a window that faced the neighbor's fence. That was where I learned early that love, in my family, was conditional. Growing up, my mother liked to say she was preparing me for the real world. What that meant in practice was criticism disguised as guidance. If I got an A, she asked why it wasn't an A+. If I smiled too much, she said I looked foolish. If I cried, she told me I was weak. Praise was rare, approval was earned, and affection was something you borrowed, never owned. My father left when I was 12. One suitcase, one argument that shook the walls. After that, it was just the two of us in the house, orbiting each other carefully, like planets that might collide if we got too close. She worked hard, I'll give her that. Long hours, church on Sundays, volunteering when it suited her image. From the outside, she was admirable. From the inside, she was suffocating. When I told her I wanted to study communications instead of accounting, she laughed, not kindly. She said, "That's not a real career, Audrey." When I moved out at 24, she said I was ungrateful. When I started my own business at 28, she told people she was worried about me. Still, I tried. I invited her to openings. I called her every Sunday. I downplayed my successes so she wouldn't feel threatened. I thought if I just loved her enough, she'd eventually soften. I thought wrong. The first crack came 2 years ago, when my business started doing well, really well. I landed a contract with a mid-size firm, then another. I hired my first employee. I bought a modest house. Nothing flashy, just proof that I could stand on my own. That was when my mother's concern turned into scrutiny. She asked questions that didn't sound like questions. How much are you making, really? Are you sure you're managing your taxes properly? Do you have enough saved if this all collapses? At first, I answered honestly. I thought she was proud, or at least curious. Then she started suggesting things, that I should let her look over my finances, that she knew a lawyer who could protect me, that it might be wise to put some assets in her name just in case. I said no. Not loudly, not angrily, just no. That was the day her tone changed. The warmth, thin as it was, disappeared. Our calls became shorter, her visits stopped. When we did talk, she sounded distant, like she was already grieving me. I didn't know she was planning something. I didn't know she was collecting documents. I didn't know she was telling people I was in trouble. I found out 6 months later when a process server knocked on my door and handed me papers that made my hands shake so badly I had to sit on the floor. My mother was suing me. Not for money directly, no, that would have looked bad. She was petitioning the court to declare that my financial decisions were reckless enough to warrant intervention. She claimed she'd been coerced into supporting me. She wanted reimbursement, damages, control. She wanted the court to put me back under her authority. Sitting in that courtroom now, listening to her lawyer dismantle my life piece by piece, I felt like I was 12 again, small, cornered, and wondering how love could feel so much like punishment. When it was my lawyer's turn, she stood calmly. She spoke about facts, about timelines, about payments and contracts and independence. She did her job well. But facts don't bleed, and I could tell the room was still leaning toward my mother's version of events, the dutiful parent, the irresponsible daughter. Then the judge raised his hand. The room went quiet. Even my mother looked up then. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at her, not at the lawyer, at her. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, "before I rule on this petition, I need to ask you something." My stomach dropped. My mother smiled politely, the way she does when she thinks she's already won. "Of course, Your Honor." The judge paused, glanced down at the file, then back up at her. His expression was unreadable. And that's where I'll stop, for now, because the question he asked next was not the one she prepared for, and the answer she gave would expose everything. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean back dramatically. He just asked his question like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, tapping the file with his pen, "can you explain why the financial support you claim you were coerced into providing continued for 18 months after your daughter became profitable?" The air shifted. You could feel it, like a glass about to crack. My mother's smile didn't disappear, but it stiffened, the way frosting does when it's been out too long. She glanced at her lawyer, just for a fraction of a second. That glance told me everything. This wasn't rehearsed. "Well," she began, folding her hands in her lap, "as a mother, you don't just stop caring when your child starts making money." The judge nodded slowly. "Of course, but caring and wiring funds are not the same thing. According to these records, the payments increased, not decreased." I felt my chest tighten. I hadn't known that detail either. She'd always framed her help as reluctant, sacrificial, like she was barely scraping by because of me. The judge continued, "You also signed 3 documents acknowledging these transfers as voluntary investments, not loans. Did you read those documents before signing?" Another pause, longer this time. "I trusted my daughter," my mother said. "I didn't think I needed to protect myself from her." That murmur you hear in courtrooms on TV, it's real. A low ripple of sound as people process what they're hearing. I saw someone in the back row lean forward. I saw my lawyer jot something down quickly. The judge didn't react. He just asked, Then why did you wait until after Miss Morgan declined to transfer partial ownership of her company to file this petition? Silence. My mother's lips parted slightly, then closed again. Her lawyer shifted in his seat. I didn't breathe, because suddenly the story she'd built, the helpless mother, the reckless daughter, had a crack running straight through it. Her lawyer stood quickly. Your Honor, with respect, that line of questioning. The judge raised a hand. I'm establishing motive. He turned back to my mother. Mrs. Morgan, I'll ask again. Why now? For the first time that day, she looked directly at me, not with love, not with regret, with something colder. Because, she said carefully, I realized my daughter no longer values my guidance. There it was. Not money, not fear, control. My mind flashed back to the night everything truly broke between us. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd almost canceled our dinner to finish a proposal. She'd shown up early, walking through my house like it was still hers, opening cabinets, commenting on my furniture, asking why I hadn't framed my degree. Halfway through the meal, she said, I've been thinking it would make sense for me to be more involved in your business. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. She laid out a plan, her plan. She'd oversee finances, approve contracts, sit in on meetings. She said it like it was obvious, like I'd been waiting for her permission all along. When I told her no, gently, she stared at me like I'd slapped her. I built you, she said. You don't get to shut me out. I told her I wasn't shutting her out, I was just setting boundaries. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and said, You'll regret this. I thought it was just something said in anger. I didn't know it was a promise. Back in the courtroom, the judge leaned back in his chair. He looked tired now, not annoyed, thoughtful. Mrs. Morgan, he said, this court does not exist to enforce parental authority over competent adults. My mother's lawyer tried again. Your Honor, if I may, I'm not finished. The judge turned his attention to me for the first time, really looked at me, not like a case, like a person. Miss Morgan, he said, have you ever missed a payment related to these obligations? No, Your Honor. Have you defaulted on any loan? No. Have you been declared insolvent or unfit to manage your affairs? No. He nodded once, then closed the file. At this point, he said, I see no legal basis for this petition. My knees almost gave out. But before relief could fully reach me, he added, however. That word hung heavier than everything else. There are additional documents referenced here that I have not yet reviewed. My mother's lawyer straightened. What documents? My lawyer asked. The judge flipped to the back of the file. Correspondence, messages, claims of verbal agreements, allegations of misrepresentation. My heart dropped into my stomach because I suddenly understood what she'd done. She hadn't just come for my money, she'd come for my reputation. The judge scheduled a continuation hearing. Gavel down, court adjourned. People stood, conversations erupted, chairs scraped against the floor. I stayed seated, frozen, while my lawyer leaned in and whispered, We need to talk. Across the room, my mother gathered her things slowly. She didn't rush. She didn't look shaken. As she passed me, she stopped. You didn't have to make this so ugly, she said quietly. I looked up at her. You sued me. She smiled thinly. I protected myself. Then she walked away. Outside the courtroom, my lawyer finally told me what the judge was referring to. Texts, emails, ones I had never sent, ones that painted me as manipulative, desperate, and dishonest. Someone had fabricated them, and there was only one person who had both the access and the motive to do it. That night, alone in my house, I sat on the floor with my phone in my hand, scrolling through my real messages, wondering how far she was willing to go. Because if she was willing to fake evidence, what else was she capable of? I didn't sleep that night. My head kept replaying the courtroom, my mother's calm smile, the judge's pause, and those fabricated messages that could ruin everything I had worked for. I stared at my phone as if it might suddenly reveal a clue, a loophole, a miracle. But all I saw were my real texts, polite, professional, nothing incriminating, and the gnawing realization that someone had deliberately tried to destroy me. The next morning, I decided I needed answers, not from my lawyer, not from the judge, from her, from my mother. I drove to the old family home, the place that had shaped me, the place where love had always come with conditions. The street was quiet, lined with maple trees just beginning to shed their golden leaves. My chest tightened as I approached the front door. I hadn't been here alone in years. When she opened the door, she looked exactly the same, immaculate, poised, calm, but the air between us was thick with years of unspoken accusations, disappointment, and suppressed anger. I could smell her perfume, a floral scent that had once been comforting, but now felt suffocating. "Audrey," she said, her voice smooth, "I wasn't expecting you. I need to understand everything, the lawsuit, the lawyer, the messages. Why?" She sighed, moving into the living room and gesturing for me to sit. The furniture was pristine, everything in its place. I had lived here for 18 years and had never seen this room feel so cold. "Why?" she repeated, sitting opposite me. "Audrey, it's complicated. No, it's not," I interrupted, my voice rising. "You did this because you didn't like that I could make it without you. You wanted to control me. You wanted to humiliate me." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Control? Humiliate? That's harsh." I felt the familiar storm of frustration and hurt rise in my chest. "Harsh? Mom, you hired a lawyer to bankrupt me in front of everyone. And don't tell me it wasn't about power. It's always been about power with you." She leaned back, her hands folded over her lap. "Audrey, you don't understand. I did it for you." I froze. The words sounded ridiculous even as they came out of her mouth. "For me? You sued me. You tried to destroy me. How is that for me?" She looked away, a flicker of something human crossing her face. "I wanted to protect the family name, our reputation. You were getting reckless, making financial decisions without consulting anyone. I was trying to teach you responsibility." My laughter was bitter. "You call suing your daughter teaching responsibility?" She didn't respond. She just stared at her hands, the veins showing beneath her skin. For a moment, I almost believed she was sincere. But then I remembered the texts, the lawyer, the careful orchestration of the courtroom spectacle. This was not protection. This was calculated. And then the past came flooding back. All those birthdays when she claimed she was busy, all those times I needed her and she disappeared, all the nights I cried alone in my bedroom because I didn't fit her vision of a daughter she could brag about. Every neglectful act, every subtle manipulation, it made sense now. It was all a pattern. "You've always done this," I said, my voice trembling. "Every time I tried to be independent, you found a way to control me, to shame me, to make me doubt myself." She flinched. It was the first crack in her perfect facade I had ever seen. But then, like a trained actor, she composed herself again. "Audrey, you're seeing this through your own hurt. I did what I thought was right." I shook my head. "Right? Right for you, maybe, not for me. You've spent my entire life deciding what's right for me, and for the first time, I'm telling you, it's over. I'm done." Her eyes softened slightly, almost apologetic, but there was no real surrender there. I realized something that made my stomach turn. She didn't care if I understood. She only cared if she had the power to decide the story. After hours of tense silence and arguments that circled like vultures over dead ground, I left her house with a single thought. She had underestimated me. She had always underestimated me, and now I needed to gather my evidence, my courage, and my strategy. Back at my apartment, I started digging. Every transaction, every email, every text, every financial record, anything that could prove my independence and expose the lies. I spent days going through stacks of documents and hours scrolling through message histories. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. She hadn't just acted alone. She had tried to manipulate friends, colleagues, even distant relatives to corroborate her story. Then came the texts that shook me to my core. Hidden, deleted, fabricated messages that mirrored my tone perfectly but twisted the meaning, painting me as manipulative, greedy, and reckless. I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. It was personal. Every lie, every omission, every betrayal was designed to break me emotionally and publicly. And that's when I found it. A digital footprint linking the creation of those fake messages to an email address my mother had access to. It was proof, hard proof, enough to challenge everything she had built against me in court. But confronting her now meant risking everything. Another courtroom, another showdown, and the thought of seeing her smug face across the room made my chest tighten. I knew I had a choice: back down like I had for years, or step into the fight fully prepared. And I never felt more alive or more terrified. Because in the middle of gathering evidence, I discovered something even more shocking. Someone else, someone I had trusted, might have been involved in this conspiracy too. The message came late one night. A friend I considered family had sent an anonymous tip. "Audrey, you're not alone in this, but you need to be careful. She's got backup." Backup? The words burned in my mind. Backup? Who else would betray me? Who else would lie to protect my mother? I stared at my phone, heart pounding, mind racing. I realized this fight was bigger than I imagined, bigger than just me and her. The next morning, I felt like I hadn't slept in a week. My eyes were dry, my head throbbed, and yet I couldn't stop thinking about that message. She's got backup. Who else could it be? A relative, a family friend, someone in my inner circle? The thought that someone I trusted might have conspired with my mother filled me with a mix of rage and disbelief. I decided the only way forward was to dig deeper. I started with my closest friends, the ones who had been around since college, people I had confided in about everything, dreams, failures, fears. I couldn't believe any of them would be involved, but the message had shaken me to my core. I called my best friend, Rachel, first. Her voice was cheerful over the phone, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in my life. "Hey, Audrey, you sound off. Everything okay?" I hesitated. How much could I say without giving away my strategy? I decided to test her. "Did you ever notice anything weird? Messages, rumors, things that seemed off about my mom's recent behavior?" There was a pause, a long, tense pause that made my stomach drop. Then she said casually, "Well, she's always been dramatic, hasn't she? But nothing serious, I guess." I didn't push further, but I felt a chill. I realized then that trust, once broken, leaves you constantly questioning everyone. Next, I focused on the digital trail. I had already traced the fabricated messages to an email address my mother had access to, but I wanted more proof, solid evidence that would hold in court. I spent hours scanning servers, backups, and old conversations. The deeper I went, the more intricate the web became. My mother hadn't just acted impulsively, she had planned this meticulously. She had anticipated every move I might make, every ally I might turn to. Then came the bombshell. Hidden deep in a cloud backup, I found an email chain that made my blood run cold. My mother had been in contact with someone I trusted, a business consultant I had worked with for years, someone I had considered family. The emails were clear. instructions on how to create false documents, how to manipulate court records, and how to make me look reckless. The betrayal hit me like a fist. I felt sick. Tears blurred my vision as I sank onto my couch. How could someone I trusted so completely turn against me? And why? I realized that fear had driven them. My mother had convinced this person that helping her would protect them too. Or perhaps she had exploited old grudges and jealousy. Whatever the reason, it didn't matter. The result was the same. I had been surrounded by deception, manipulated from every side. The next step was confrontation, but I needed allies. I reached out to my lawyer immediately, laying out the evidence. She was shocked, but calm. "This is bigger than I thought," she said. "We can use this, but you have to be prepared. Once we confront them, there's no going back." I nodded. I was ready. A few days later, I arranged a meeting under the guise of a casual business discussion. My mother and her accomplice, my trusted consultant, would be there. I rehearsed every question, every pause, every point of evidence I would present. I needed them to feel the weight of their betrayal before anyone else did. The meeting took place in a neutral conference room downtown. The air was cold, sterile, and heavy with anticipation. My mother arrived first, calm and composed as ever. Her accomplice followed, smiling in that insincere way that now made my skin crawl. I sat across from them, my hands folded in front of me. My lawyer was discreetly at the side, ready to intervene if needed. "I know everything," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "The emails, the messages, the fabricated documents, everything." My mother's eyes flickered. For the first time, she didn't look in control. Her accomplice shifted nervously in their seat. "You don't understand," my mother said, her voice tight. "I did what I had to do for the family, for you, to protect everyone." "Protect me?" I snapped. "By trying to bankrupt me and frame me? By turning people I trust against me? That's not protection. That's control. That's betrayal." Her accomplice opened their mouth, but I cut them off. "And you," I said, pointing, "helped her. You lied, you manipulated, you betrayed me. Do you understand what that means? You betrayed someone who trusted you more than anyone else." The room was tense. The silence was suffocating. Then my mother's voice dropped, almost a whisper. "You think you've won." "I haven't won yet," I said, meeting her gaze. "But I will, and the truth will come out." At that moment, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about money or reputation anymore. It was about standing up for myself, claiming my power, and refusing to be manipulated again. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt a surge of empowerment. As I left the conference room, my phone buzzed with a new message, another anonymous tip. "Watch your back. They aren't done." I stopped in my tracks. My heart raced. This wasn't over. The deeper I dug, the more dangerous it became. The next few weeks were a blur of investigations, phone calls, and sleepless nights. I felt like I was running through a labyrinth with walls closing in from every direction. My mother's web of deceit was larger than I imagined, and every time I uncovered a thread, it led to another betrayal. I spent hours in my apartment, spreading documents across the floor, comparing messages, contracts, and financial statements. I could almost see the pattern forming, a trail of manipulation, lies, and carefully orchestrated control. And yet, even with all this evidence, the thought of facing my mother again made my stomach knot. Then, the unthinkable happened. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I had arranged a meeting with one of my key witnesses, a former employee of my mother who had first-hand knowledge of her schemes. She arrived nervously, clutching a folder. Her eyes darted around the room as if she expected someone to jump out at her. "Audrey," she whispered, "you don't know how far this goes. There are people in your circle, friends, colleagues, helping her. I didn't believe it either until I saw it." I felt a chill run down my spine. Who? I asked, my voice barely audible. She shook her head. I can't say here, not yet, but I'll help you gather proof. You need it for the court. And be careful, they're dangerous when cornered. Dangerous. That word settled over me like a storm cloud. I realized that my mother's control wasn't just emotional anymore. It had reached into my professional life, my finances, and my safety. She had allies, people who had been complicit in her lies and schemes. The next day, I started planning my next move. I couldn't act recklessly, but I couldn't wait either. Every day was a risk. Every phone call, every email, every meeting could be monitored. I felt trapped in a high-stakes game where the rules were unknown and the consequences were severe. That night, I received a call from my lawyer. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the tension beneath it. Audrey, we need to move fast. I've reviewed the evidence and it's strong, but your mother isn't just going to fold. She's going to fight back, hard. And I suspect she has more tricks up her sleeve. I took a deep breath. I know. I've seen it. I don't know how much more I can handle emotionally. She's twisted everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and loyalty. You're stronger than you think, my lawyer replied. And this isn't just about proving your innocence. It's about exposing the truth, about reclaiming your life. The words gave me a strange sense of relief. It wasn't just about fighting her anymore. It was about standing up for myself, for the first time in my life, without fear of her judgment or manipulation. A week later, the continuation hearing was scheduled. The courtroom was packed again, but this time I wasn't alone. My lawyer, my witnesses, and even a few close friends who had remained loyal sat behind me. I felt their support like a shield, a small but crucial reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. My mother arrived, as always, calm and composed, but there was something different this time, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I wondered if she knew that I had uncovered more than she anticipated. The judge called the session to order. Papers shuffled, murmurs died down, and all eyes turned towards us. My mother's lawyer began speaking, attempting to reinforce the narrative of my recklessness and dependence, but my lawyer was ready. She presented evidence meticulously: emails, financial records, testimony from my witnesses. Every piece of the puzzle painted a clear picture of my independence and my mother's manipulation. Then came the moment I had been dreading and anticipating. The judge looked my mother directly, holding the weight of the courtroom's attention. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, "I've reviewed the additional documents. I've spoken to witnesses. There are serious discrepancies that suggest deliberate misrepresentation. Can you explain why these emails and messages exist, showing actions contrary to your claims?" My mother's smile faltered. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. The courtroom felt like it had fallen silent, the air thick with tension. And then, the twist no one expected. My mother's accomplice, the consultant who had fabricated evidence, looked around nervously, shifted in their seat, and finally spoke up. I was wrong," they said, voice trembling. I didn't mean for this to go this far. I can't lie anymore. Audrey's mother instructed me to create false messages, but it's not truthful." A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. My mother's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. I felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the battle wasn't over. My mother's reaction proved she had underestimated me, but it also revealed that she was cornered and dangerous, and I still had to see this through. The judge leaned forward, peering over his glasses. "Mrs. Morgan," he said slowly, "the evidence before this court suggests serious manipulation. I'm considering sanctions, but before I make a ruling, is there anything further you wish to state?" Her silence was deafening. The room waited, every eye fixed on her, every whisper ceased. The courtroom was electric with tension. My mother sat frozen, her perfectly composed mask cracking ever so slightly, while her accomplice fidgeted in their seat, eyes darting nervously. The murmurs of spectators and court staff faded into a dull hum in my ears. Everything I had worked for, every sleepless night and painstaking search for evidence had led to this moment. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, voice calm but firm, "it appears that not only were documents and messages fabricated, but there is corroboration from a third party admitting involvement in these fabrications. How do you respond?" My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in my life, I saw her hesitate, falter, and lose control. Her calm demeanor, the one that had haunted me since childhood, shattered under the weight of truth. The consultant, her accomplice, had already admitted the lies. The courtroom was turning, slowly but unmistakably, in my favor. I could feel my heart pounding, not from fear, but from the surge of empowerment that comes from finally being seen for who you truly are. "You see," my lawyer said, standing and addressing the court, "the pattern here is clear. Mrs. Morgan not only attempted to manipulate her daughter's financial standing, but enlisted others to create a false narrative designed to humiliate, control, and coerce. This is not the action of a concerned parent. It is deliberate misconduct." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even some of my mother's supporters looked uneasy. I caught the subtle nod of approval from a few of my witnesses. Their presence had been crucial in holding the truth together. The judge paused, flipping through the file, then looked directly at my mother. "Mrs. Morgan, you have a choice here. You can acknowledge the manipulation, apologize, and take responsibility, or you can continue on this path, which may result in legal sanctions, financial penalties, and a permanent record of misconduct." Her voice was tight, brittle when she finally spoke. I was only trying to protect her. I thought I knew what was best." I held my breath. I had heard this line before, countless times. But now the power dynamics had shifted. The courtroom was mine as much as it was hers. "You didn't protect me," I said, my voice steady but cutting. "You tried to destroy me. You weaponized your love to control me. And you almost succeeded." Her eyes welled with tears, but I could see through them. It wasn't regret. It was realization that the truth had slipped from her grasp. The judge's gavel hit the desk sharply. "Given the evidence, this court finds the petition to declare Miss Morgan financially incompetent to be without merit. Further, due to the deliberate fabrication of evidence, Mrs. Morgan will be subject to sanctions, and the court recommends a review of any professional engagements involving the accomplice." The words rang in the courtroom like a bell tolling justice. Relief and disbelief washed over me. I wanted to run, to hug someone, to cry, but I stayed seated, absorbing the moment fully. My mother slumped in her chair, defeated, her accomplice's head bowed. It was a strange kind of closure, one that felt both vindicating and hollow. The betrayal had been exposed, but the scars remained. After the hearing, I walked out into the crisp air outside the courthouse. The city felt different now. I felt different, lighter, stronger, and more certain of my own value than I ever had before. For the first time, I understood that healing wasn't just about winning in court or exposing lies. It was about reclaiming your life from those who tried to define it for you. I had survived the storm, confronted the betrayal, and taken back my power. The days that followed were quiet but purposeful. I started setting boundaries with family, reassessing friendships, and focusing on my own growth. Therapy helped me unpack the deep-seated issues from my childhood, and I finally allowed myself to grieve, not just the betrayal, but the years of feeling unseen and unheard. And in that process, I discovered a profound truth. Love that comes with control and manipulation isn't love. True love supports, uplifts, and respects boundaries. I rebuilt my life with intention, choosing allies carefully and trusting my instincts. I found joy in independence, pride in my accomplishments, and peace in knowing that I could face any challenge without compromising my integrity. Sometimes my mother reached out. I respond cautiously, politely, but I never let the past dictate my future. The fight changed me. It strengthened me. It taught me to stand firm, to demand respect, and to honor my own worth above the expectations of anyone else, even family. And if there's one thing I want anyone reading this to understand, it's this. Betrayal can hurt. It can humiliate. It can shake the very foundation of who you are. But it doesn't have to define you. You can rise from it, stronger, wiser, and unshakable. The weeks after the courtroom victory were surreal. I woke up each morning half expecting the nightmare to resume, half expecting another trap to appear. But it didn't. The storm had passed, or at least the worst of it. I finally had the space to breathe, to think, and to rebuild myself without the weight of my mother's manipulation pressing down on me. The first morning, I didn't check my phone for news of fabricated claims or secret messages. I realized something profound. I was free, not just legally, but emotionally. I could make decisions without fear of retaliation, without second-guessing every word and action. I could trust my own judgment again. I started with boundaries. For years, I had blurred lines with my mother, trying to meet her impossible expectations while hiding my own needs. Now, I blocked numbers, muted emails, and restricted contact to what was necessary and polite. I learned to say no without guilt, to protect myself first, to honor my own life. Therapy became a cornerstone of my healing. Lying on the couch in a quiet office, I let myself cry for the little girl who had felt unseen, unheard, and unloved. I allowed myself to acknowledge the betrayal, the manipulation, and the grief that came with it. But I also allowed myself to recognize my strength, my perseverance, and my resilience. Every session reinforced one undeniable truth. I had survived something most people could never imagine, and I had come out stronger. Work became my sanctuary. I poured myself into my business, my clients, and my projects, not as a distraction, but as a celebration of my independence. Every contract I signed, every successful project I completed felt like a victory. Not over my mother, but over the version of myself that had doubted her words and let fear dictate my life. And yet, healing wasn't just about building walls or focusing on work. It was about reconnecting with life in ways I had neglected. I started meeting friends for coffee, attending art exhibits, volunteering, and even taking a weekend trip alone, a small but radical act of reclaiming freedom. The world felt bigger, brighter, and more alive than it had in years. One afternoon, as I walked through the city park, I reflected on everything I had endured. Betrayal, humiliation, manipulation, each had left its mark, but each had also given me clarity. I realized that my mother's attempts to control me had, ironically, forced me to discover the strength I never knew I had. The fight had been painful, but it had also been transformative. And I knew something else. I would never allow anyone to dictate my life again. Not my mother, not friends, not colleagues. I had learned to trust myself, to honor my instincts, and to protect my emotional space fiercely. Months passed. My mother attempted a few tentative phone calls, always polite, always careful. I responded minimally, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Distance became my shield, clarity my ally. I focused on building my life on my own terms. One evening, as I closed my laptop after a long day of work, I looked around my apartment, my safe space, my sanctuary. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known for decades. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, and public humiliation. I had stared it in the face and survived. And I understood, finally, the life lesson hidden in all of it. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming your power from it. It's about turning betrayal into a lesson, humiliation into strength, and manipulation into wisdom. I smiled, thinking about how far I had come, how much I had endured, and how much stronger I had become. I thought about the little girl in the pale blue room, the young woman fighting for respect, and the woman I had become, a woman who no longer feared control, who no longer doubted herself, who finally embraced her worth. And I realized something else, quietly, powerfully. I was free to choose the life I wanted, without apology, without fear, and without compromise. The months that followed felt almost surreal. I had won the legal battle, but the emotional journey was still unfolding. Some mornings I woke up haunted by memories of courtroom tension, the whispers of betrayal, and the sting of my mother's calculated cruelty. Other days I felt a quiet strength I had never known, a calm certainty that no one could take away. I began to rebuild my relationships cautiously. Friends who had stood by me were now more important than ever, and I spent intentional time nurturing those bonds. I realized that trust is fragile, and I could no longer give it freely, but it was possible to create safe spaces for connection and loyalty. Therapy continued to be a lifeline. In one session, my therapist said something that stuck with me. "Audrey, you've reclaimed your life, but healing isn't linear. You'll still encounter reminders of the past. The goal isn't to forget, but to live fully despite it." Those words became my mantra. I started taking risks again, small ones at first: solo travel, investing in new business ventures, public speaking. Each step reinforced that I was no longer defined by fear, by betrayal, or by anyone else's perception of me. One evening, months after the trial, my mother sent a letter. No lawyer, no intermediaries, just her words. I hesitated before opening it, my chest tight. Inside was an apology, brief and measured. She didn't admit everything, but she acknowledged that her actions had hurt me deeply. I read it slowly, absorbing the tone. For the first time, I felt a strange mixture of relief and clarity. The apology wasn't about forgiveness, it was about closure. I didn't need to respond immediately. I didn't need to forgive on her timeline. What mattered was that I owned my power to decide how to engage. I reflected on the lessons of the past year. I had learned to recognize manipulation early, to set unbreakable boundaries, and to trust my instincts. I had learned that family isn't always defined by blood. It's defined by respect, loyalty, and care. And most importantly, I had learned that my worth is inherent, not granted or taken away by anyone, not even those I once called family. With that understanding, I began sharing my story publicly. I created a blog, gave interviews, and even recorded a YouTube series about navigating betrayal, reclaiming personal power, and the journey of healing. Each video became a testament to resilience, an encouragement to anyone who had felt manipulated, silenced, or undervalued. The response was overwhelming. Emails, comments, and messages poured in from people who had faced similar betrayals, all seeking guidance or comfort. Through this, I realized something profound. Pain, when acknowledged and processed, can become purpose. My experiences, raw, painful, humiliating, had transformed into a source of empowerment, not just for me, but for others. I also began to rebuild my life in practical ways. I invested in my business, pursued personal passions I had once shelved, and surrounded myself with people who inspired growth rather than control. Slowly, my home, my work, and my heart reflected the life I had fought to reclaim. Looking back, The betrayal that had once threatened to consume me became the catalyst for profound change. I had faced the darkness, confronted those who sought to diminish me, and emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and deeply aware of my own boundaries and value. And as I sat in my sunlit apartment, notebook in hand, reflecting on the journey, I felt a quiet sense of triumph. Not the hollow triumph of winning a court case, but the authentic triumph of surviving, learning, and reclaiming every piece of my life that had once been threatened. Because in the end, I realized betrayal can shatter trust, but it can never destroy self-worth. Pain can carve scars, but those scars can shine as proof of survival. And love, when misguided or weaponized, can teach the most important lesson of all: how to fiercely, unapologetically protect the most valuable person in your life, yourself. Have you ever reclaimed your life after someone you trusted tried to break you? How did you find your strength? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear from you.